Whether you're working on a multi-million dollar project that's going to span a year and managing multiple team members, or you're just an individual contributor working on a single piece of work that should span about 2 weeks, you need to know three things. First, you need to know, when do I need to start each part of this work or project, each task? When do each task need to be done? And then how do I know as I go throughout the project, am I on track to complete this when I originally set out to complete it? The answer to those three questions is found in a work plan. Hi, this is Matt Plummer and I'm the CEO of Zarvana, and in this video I want to walk you through the 6 simple steps to creating a work plan. What is a work plan? A work plan, as simple as it sounds, is a plan for how you're going to accomplish a piece of work. It lays out when each task needs to be done and when it needs to be started, and it can be used throughout the project or process to determine whether you're on track to completing it in the time you set forth. So let's jump into these 6 steps and walk through a really simplified example. This is for anyone who is, starting off and just wants to get better at completing their own work on time, or someone who's managing large projects. This will provide the foundation that is needed for any kind of skill level or role level within that spectrum. So here we go. The steps to create a work plan. What is the first step? Determine the objective of your work. You need to know what you're trying to create, what you're trying to produce, what deliverable you're trying to have at the end. In this case, in our example, we're going to use the example of building a house. So here, as simple as it sounds, our objective is to build a house, for someone to live in. So what is step 2? Step 2 then becomes identify the ultimate deadline for your work. What do we mean by ultimate deadline? Ultimate deadline is the deadline by which you need to complete your objective. And so that is when it needs to be finalized, when it's ready to go. In this case, in our example, let's assume that we want this house completely built. And by that, we mean the new owner can walk in there by November 1st, 2020. So that gives us about 10 months to complete. So that is our ultimate deadline, November 1st. From there, we have step 3. In step 3, we have to figure out what is every task that is needed to complete our objective. And so in our example here, and again, I'm using this as an example. I'm not an expert contractor, so if you have problems with this list, try to let it go and focus on the role of work planning here. So here is a list of 10 steps that are required to build a house. Now, I pulled these from another source. They may not be perfect, but you get the idea. When you're thinking about your project, you have to list out what are the steps that are necessary to successfully complete this objective. Here, the key is being comprehensive. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be super detailed. So you can see here that we're not talking about, okay, pour concrete in this trough, or nail board A to board B. That's a much lower level of detail. So it doesn't mean that your work plan needs to be super, super detailed, but it does need to be comprehensive, meaning that you can't leave off anything. And so if there's something that's not represented here in one of these 10 steps that you'll have to do that doesn't fit within that, then that's going to be a problem. So again, as you're starting, err on the side of comprehensiveness. Over include things, and then you can always calibrate and ratchet that back if it's becoming too cumbersome. But this is step 3. You need to write out all the tasks that need to be done. Step 4. The next thing to do is to determine the expected duration of each task. Essentially, how long will it take to do each task? This is critical to being able to determine when do things need to start and finish, and will you complete in time for your ultimate deadline. And so here again, if we look at our list, now what we've done is we've added in some durations. Again, these are hypothetical. Don't worry about if they're accurate or not. The point is you want to develop an estimate of how long each of your major tasks are going to take. Now, how do you do that in practice? So the tool that is, actually has the most research behind it, that it's correlated with delivering projects on time, is what people call the cost analogous tool. What that essentially means is find a task that is similar to the one that you're going to be doing, and then determine, a task that you've already done in the past, determine how long that took you, and then compare it to the current task and make any adjustments that are needed. So for example, if we look at task 1, prepare the construction site and pour the foundation. So, if you've built 50 houses before and okay, on average, it takes me a month and a half to complete this step. Then what you say is, okay, my starting assumption is that it's going to take me a month and a half here. But then you might say, okay, well, in this case, with this house, it's a much smaller house than we're used to, and the ground is already prepared, so we don't have to do too much excavation work there. So I think this will only take me a month. That's how you apply and use the cost analogous tool. Another way to get good at estimating and understanding how long things will take you is to do what is called time boxing, or planning out your whole day. And so if you're regularly blocking time on your calendar for tasks that you're going to do individually, then what you can do is, as you go through that time block, you can add a little note into that calendar invite that says, oh, planned for, thought this would take an hour, actually took me 2 hours, or planned an hour and a half, but actually only took me 45 minutes. And then, every few weeks you can go back and look through your calendar and be learning and understanding at a deeper level how long work actually takes you to do. And so this is step 4. This is figuring out how long does each step take me to do. And it's critical. If your estimates are way off here, your work plan is going to be largely useless. So it's important that you invest in, arriving at pretty strong and robust recommendations for how long it will take you. If that feels like a challenge, at least get something out there, start with a hypothesis, and then you can work from there. Let's move on to step 5. Step 5 is understanding the relationship between tasks. This is important because, if task B can only be done after task A, then that's going to determine when you can start task B. But if task C needs to be done after task A and B, then, that's going to determine something else about the deadlines and when things need to be done. And so there are 3 basic relationships. And again, this is a super simplification of it. As a starting point, it gets much more complex than this. But there are 3 basic relationships between tasks: sequential, parallel, and then multi-dependent. So let's just talk through each of these. Sequential, as you would guess, is the simplest. And this is, you do task A. When you're done with task A, you move on to task B, and then C, and so on. And, this is the example we're going to illustrate today. This is the simplest, but it's not always the case. So it's important that you think beyond that. Parallel, here basically you have 2 different, what some might call work streams happening, or, task projects, or happening at the same time, and then eventually they come together. And so an example here might be, if you're, let's use our building of the house example. If the owner was like, build a house and build me a barn in the backyard. The construction going on in the barn can happen in parallel and simultaneous to the construction happening in the house. And those actually are not dependent on each other at all, or at least for the most part, they are not. And so those can be happening at the same time, but eventually it needs to converge to complete that ultimate objective of building the house, building, the property of what's been asked for. So that would be an example of parallel. The third relationship type is what I call multi-dependent. And here you can see that, some tasks are possible to do kind of in parallel, but some need to converge and happen at the same time. And this is the most complicated of the 3 that we're talking about, because you actually need to coordinate the 2 different parallel tracks of work in a more sophisticated way. And so here an example from, the building the house world is if the owner were to say, okay, I want a pool in the backyard with a patio and, landscaping. So, you might be able to say, okay, landscaping folks are going to start clearing the ground. They're going to remove some of the existing shrubbery, while the pool building folks are going to, start digging the hole. But then, in terms of like building that actual patio part around the pool, that's actually going to be dependent on both of those. Like the landscaping folks can't just go ahead and do that when they finish clearing the shrubbery. That task is going to be dependent on the hole being dug. And so you can see that there's kind of a converging and then resuming back into parallel tracks. And so that, again, is the most complicated. It's important that you understand the dependencies between your tasks in order to be able to assign deadlines and due dates for them. That was step 5, understanding task relationships. Step 6, and our last step, is to determine the deadlines for all tasks in reverse order. And here, what we mean by reverse order is that you start at the end, the closest to your ultimate deadline, and you work your way forward to the first task. And so let's actually walk through this example here. So here we can see our task list again with the duration. And then remember, we said our ultimate deadline is November 1st, 2020. So that gives us about 10 months to complete this. You can see our months there segmented by week. And so what we want to do is we want to start, okay, November 1st is our ultimate deadline. And now for step 10, that's going to take us 0.25 months or about a week. And so you can see, okay, that will take us a week. So that means if we want to complete it on November 1st, we have to start it at the beginning of the 3rd week of October to do that. So then you work your way backwards. You look at step 9. And you say, okay, step 9 is going to take us 2 weeks. And so then we have to start that at the 1st week of October. And the deadline is going to be the 3rd week of October in order to have time for step 10. And you can begin to do this back and back and back. And so step 8 then is a single week task. So we see that slot in there. Step 7 goes another 2 week back. 6, 5 is a longer one. So that's going to take us a month and a half. 4, 3, 2, and then ultimately 1. And so here, this actually provides super valuable information for you, because think about it. If somebody were to come up to you and say, when are you going to complete the drywall for this project, which is step 5, without having done this exercise, you would have very little idea of when exactly that needs to start and how long, when the deadline is for that. And so this provides a nice, simple visualization of when work needs to be started and when it needs to be done. What we know here, which is great for this project, is that you actually don't need to start this project until the middle of March, and so you have some time to prepare for it. So that might be super important in terms of when you're assembling the team, when you're compiling the resources, buying the products, etc. And so you can see the value of this type of exercise. And ultimately, you can assemble it in something that looks like this if it's helpful. There's many different formats, Gantt charts, etc., by which you can visualize this information. But the important information that you have at the end of a work plan is that you have every task listed. You have how long you expect each task to take, the deadline, when is it due, and the start date, when you must start it by. So here are the 6 steps to creating a work plan. Just to recap them one more time. We have the first, determine the objective of your work, which in our case was building the house. Identify that ultimate deadline. When does that objective need to be completed by? In our case, it was November 1st. Step 3 is listing out all the tasks required to complete the objective. Here, remember, be comprehensive, but vary the level of detail based on your needs and relevancy. And, and one thing just to add there is that, in this case, step 1 through 10 is made up our work plan, but you could imagine taking step 1 then and creating your own work plan just for step 1. And so, again, it's about level of detail, what's necessary at a given point in time. Step 4 is determining the duration of each task. How long is it going to take? Be conservative there. If you're off by a week for each of these 10 tasks, it's going to make a big difference in the end. And so, better to err on the side of being conservative than too aggressive. Step 5 here is understanding the relationship between tasks. Again, we talked through, is it a sequential relationship, parallel, or multi-dependent? And then finally, step 6 is determine the intermediate deadlines that are the deadline of each task, starting in reverse order and working your way back. So those are the 6 steps to creating a work plan. You can do this for a 2-week piece of work that you're doing on your own or a big project. Obviously, you'll have to get a little more complicated with that, but this should help you determine when things need to be started, when they need to be done, and whether you're on track to complete projects, which is hugely important. Most projects today are not delivered on time or on budget, and it's because we don't do things like create robust work plans and then actually track our progress towards them over the course of the project. Thanks for watching this video. Hopefully it was valuable to you. You'll be able to put it into practice. If so, please like it or share it with someone else who you think would find it valuable, and subscribe to this channel because we'll be sharing more content like this. Thanks again for watching.